Hello and welcome to another episode of Trash to Track. In this episode we're going to be looking at Mark's Hornby 4F locomotive. We've looked at Mark's locos before, namely his Tornado and his Duchess. So let's have a look what we're dealing with this time. This Hornby 4F looks quite a nice model, but dates right back from the Airfix period, and is a similar motor construction to the Dean goods we did right back in episode 1 of Trash to Track. Doing the usual battery test, the 4F is showing absolutely no signs of life whatsoever. The motor's not even humming, so there's either a problem with the motor or the pickups on this 4F. So let's crack it open and have a look at what we're dealing with. It also becomes apparent that all the traction tyres are missing off this tender, so we're going to have a look at replacing these. So the first thing I do is just pull out those clipping couplings there, and I'm going to start by separating the loco and tender with the screws here. However, the loco and tender are also permanently fixed with the wiring, which is soldered from the pickups in the front of the loco direct to the motor terminals in the tender. So setting them aside there, as I said, as you can see, they're joined permanently with the wires. I'm going to unscrew the two tender weights here, which also hold the motor assembly in place. Once both weights have been removed, the motor simply unclips from the tender chassis frame, and then we can get to work and see why this 4F has given up the ghost. The motor simply just pushes down, although it does take a little bit of twisting the plastic just to release the motor, and there was a coupling hook there that was stuck to the magnet of the motor underneath the tender frame. Out pops the motor assembly, and as you can see, like I said, it's permanently coupled. This is one of those motors you unscrew from the back, so we're going to have to take this apart and give it a blooming good clean up. I'm just going to put a battery direct to the motor terminal to see if there's any life, and the motor does start spinning into life, although it's not the best of runners, so it probably could do with a jolly good service, as who knows when the last time this was taken apart. I'm going to cut these wires so that I can work on the motor separately. So using a pair of snips, I just cut the wires and we'll resolder these later on. Now that this assembly is separated, I'm going to start by unscrewing this rear motor keeper plate here, just to release and clean up all the cogs that are inside, and also get the motor armature out and give the commutator a good clean up and a polish. These are held in place by just two simple screws like we did with the Dean goods, and it just pulls apart. I'm also going to release the base keeper plate slightly with these two screws, just to allow the wheels to drop, although I'm not taking the wheels out just yet, but this allows the wheels enough slack to pull the motor keeper plate away. Once that's out, the armature is simply pulled out from its magnetic housing, and the commutator doesn't look too bad. I mean, I've seen worse, and both brushes come out okay. It's just one of the springs is stuck in there. So I'm going to clean the commutator with my normal method of cotton buds and methylated spirits, just to remove most of the built up carbon. And then once I've done this, I'm going to give it a polish up with the fiberglass pencil, just using it gently here just to polish up each of the poles on the motor there. And then once that's done, I'm going to also polish it again, just to remove any fibres, again with a cotton bud and methylated spirits. Now I'm going to clean all these cogs out. There seems to be a lot of congealed yellow grease in here, as well as fibres and fluff that have got wrapped around the cogs. So I'm going to take this keeper plate off and then remove each cog individually and give it a good clean up to remove all the crud. My chosen method, if you've not watched Trash to Track before, is a cotton bud dipped in methylated spirits, just to remove all of the built up grease and grime on each of these cogs. For model locomotives that have got a heavier build-up of grease and grime, I do use the WD-40 contact cleaner, but there's not the build-up on this model to warrant using it this time. Once all the grease and grime has been removed, I'm going to put a fresh bit of oil there in that bearing, and then reassemble this with all the cogs in the correct place, and then reapply some lubrication. Now I'm going to have a look at the wheels and the cogs on the wheels. So I've taken the base keeper plate off completely, and I'm going to give the motor housing a good clean up, again with the cotton bud and methylated spirits, just to remove all the dust and grime that's built up on this over the years. I'm now going to start rebuilding the motor by putting the armature back in. followed by the back of the armature and the back of the motor with all these cogs. But as I said, as I've cleaned it all off, I'm going to use my normal silicone grease and a cocktail stick just to put the small amount of lubrication back on the cogs, as we've removed all the old lubrication and the plastic parts wear quickly if they're left unlubricated. So I'm just going to use a cocktail stick there to spread the grease in amongst the cogs, and then the rear of the armature plate there goes through the hole and it all lines up quite nicely, and then is re-secured in place with the 2 retaining screws that we undid earlier on. Now it's time to rebuild the bottom and all the cogs pushed back in place after being cleaned. I've cleaned all the axles and the wheels, and then I put all these back in place, ready for the base keeper plate to be screwed back on. Once this has all been put back on, just tighten the screws up there. Again, advice I give in every trash to track is do not try and over tighten your screws, as all that would do is damage and warp the plastic on the model. Once that's back in place, I give the brushes a clean with some methylated spirits on a cotton bud, just to wipe off the carbon buildup that has built up over time. And then the brushes and springs are replaced into their housing on the front of the motor. I put the 2 brushes in, followed by the springs, and then this brush retaining assembly with this capacitor on it is then pushed in place and is a simple friction fit. This pushes over the springs and holds it all in place. A simple battery test now, when I get that out of the way, shows that the motor is now lovely smooth, it's quiet, and it's running like a Swiss watch. So all this tender body needed, all the tender drive needed was a good service. Now I've got my tub full of traction tyres, and I pick out 6 that fit, and I apply these to the wheels, just using a bit of gentle finger pressure there. Don't go too mad, as you can snap the traction tyres if you're not careful. And then I put one on all the wheels that require them. The tender base plate just needs a good dusting. Nothing overly wrong with this, just very dusty from storage, but the back vacuum pipe there is broken. So using a small amount of Loctite super glue, I just place some on there and then bend the pipe back into place and let the glue set. I also refit the tender drive there to the tender chassis and set that aside, as we're now going to have a look at the locomotive part, which picks up power. Again, this is very dusty, so giving it a dust down with an old makeup brush removes all the loose debris and dust off the model, and then I unscrew the 2 screws that hold the chassis in place to have a look at the wheels. A lot of these old ex-Airfix models use the same principle, the Dean Goods and this 4F, whereby the front loco wheels are used as pickups and the tender wheels are simply traction tied to allow maximum haulage. Now the chassis has been removed, it's a case of undoing these 2 screws on the top here after I've given it a good dust over, and the wheels and the pickup assembly all come out as one piece. So while this is apart, I'll just gently pull it apart there, I'm going to give the pickups a good clean, as there's a lot of build-up of black sticky substance all over the pickups. So with a cotton bud and meths, I clean all the pickups. I also clean the wheel backs with a fiberglass pencil, and then finish up by polishing with a cotton bud and meths again. But I don't clean the wheel treads while they're out, because trying to turn them all individually makes the side rods twist and it can cause issues. So I'm going to clean all this up and then reassemble the driving loco chassis here, just putting a small bit of lubrication on the axles, as there's no bearings on this model. The plastic simply rubs against the metal axles and can wear out if it's left to run dry. And then this part was screwed back on, and then once that was screwed back on, I then clean the wheels with a fiberglass pencil, as like I said, this assembly keeps the wheels true, so when I turn the wheels using my finger, all 6 turn at once, whereas if I tried this when it was out of the casing, they don't turn the same and it can twist the side rods. So all 6 wheel treads were given a good clean with the fiberglass pencil, and they were heavily oxidised, which probably explains why it wasn't running properly. Once the fiberglass pencil's done, I clean them all up and give them a final polish with a cotton bud, and then I reassemble the loco part by reapplying the chassis with the wheels in there, and then attaching the 2 screws, ensuring that you've got the tender drawbar the correct way round, and make sure it's in line with the hole, and then just tighten the screws up gently. Once that's all done, it was a case of making sure it was free rolling. As you can see, there it is. And please ensure that all the pickups are in line with the wheels. A new coupling was fitted to the front of the loco, and then the wires were threaded through this rectangular hole in the tender chassis frame, ready for resoldering onto the motor terminals. The eagle-eyed will see that the tender drive unit is actually in back to front there, but I rectified this and then added a little bit of extra pickup wire to each of the wires using the soldering iron, just so that the wire wasn't too tight between the loco and the tender. The tender weights were then replaced with the screws, and these go on a certain way as they've got cast holes in the weights to allow for the cog mechanism. And once that was done, I turned my attention to the tender body shell, and all this needed was a blooming good dusting, as this looked like it had been sat on the shelf for years. Once it was all dusted, the tender body shell was simply clipped back into place using the plastic lugs there, and the tender body was secured back onto the loco using the 2 screws we took out before. Again, as I've said hundreds of times, do not try and over tighten your screws, as you will end up damaging your model. Now let's give it a battery test again to see if all our hard work has paid off and this 4F now runs. And as you can see, the battery test there proves instantly that all this 4F needed was a jolly good service, because the wheels had oxidised, all the lubrication had gone solid, and it just needed a general clean-up, ready for going back into service on Mark's layout. One of the last things to do is replace this broken coupling at the back there. Using a spare, this simply clips in place. And we'll have a look at it now running around my son's DC layout. If you've got a loco you'd like to see featured in a future episode of Trash to Track, send me an email with the email address on screen now, and we'll have a look at getting it sent over. There is no turntable shot in this one, as when I filmed this it was December and the outside temperature was -5, and I wasn't going out there just to film a 4F on a turntable. Thanks for watching Trash to Track again. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you again in the next one. Bye for now.